All right. Well, welcome back. As I said, we are going to paint the life of Abraham Kuyper tonight. Last week, you might remember, we talked about the descent into chaos that was going on in the church because of the Enlightenment. Now, the Enlightenment had, as I mentioned to you, was effective in several different areas of life and was positive in many of those contributions, but in terms of theology, it only turned men's minds and the power of reason and the priority of reason against the Bible, and it began to deteriorate our appreciation, our understanding, our willingness to follow it, and to the point where there were theology professors by the 18th century were rejecting Scripture altogether and reducing the gospel, if they had any use for it at all, reducing it to merely a moral lesson. We need to do good. We need to be good people. And that's really all that the Bible has to teach us. Everything else is myth. Everything else is superstition. Everything else is not worth paying attention to. And so we can easily just set it aside. And that had gained such strength in church and in seminary training and in the minds of young seminarians, brains full of mush, that it permeated down and it was being taught in the local churches. And while that may sound familiar to you, you could say, boy, a lot of that sounds just like today. We've got this church over here who dismisses the Bible for this reason, and we got that church over there who's all about this and that and the other. And we think, well, how in the world have we survived as a church this long? If it was deteriorating to the point of collapse by the 18th century, how is it that we here in the 21st, how come we're struggling in many of the same ways? And the answer is that when God raises up His champions of the faith, the church turns back to the Word of God and to faith and to the supernatural gospel, and it restores the church. It doesn't return the church to the good old days, but it restores it. And that, in a nutshell, is the story of Abraham Kuyper. Now, this is not Abraham Kuyper. I will tell you who she is in a minute, but I wanted you to get a good picture of her. Let's start now with orienting ourselves again as to where we are. You remember that we have studied Martin Luther in Germany. We have studied Calvin in Switzerland. We have studied John Knox in Scotland. We have studied the Puritans and the parliamentarians in Great Britain. And all of those things are influential in building the history of the Reformation as we know it. And you would think that we have covered everything we need to know about Reformation history. But the truth of the matter is that something is going on in a whole nother country, the Netherlands, that is just as significant to our past and to our heritage as anything else we've been studying elsewhere. But for some reason, we don't really touch on them. We don't talk about them very much. But as I introduce you to this, you'll say, yes, okay, now I see the connection. You'll start to see some bridges here. We'll start in 1600. This is the map of the world. You see all the green? That is the great Spanish Empire, not the British Empire, the Spanish Empire. The Empire of Spain covered the entire globe. This is actually by 1600. It began earlier than that, but it covered the entire globe and had assets on it the Spanish, the Empire of Spain was monstrous and powerful. And it was during this period of time, you could now, when you understand that, you can understand the rise that was, of course, dominated and controlled by Catholicism, that was feeling threatened coming up to this period of time. And from 1478, I'm using my cheat sheet here, 1478 to 1834 was the Spanish Inquisition. And so you can see it wasn't just what was going on in little bitty Spain. You could get into trouble anywhere for speaking out against the Catholic Church. It was a real oppressive kind of thing. No, we joke about the Spanish Inquisition now, but it was a murderous and nightmarish kind of circumstance of control and oppression. And that empire covered, when you've heard the phrase that will come up later, the sun never sets on the British Empire. You ever heard that? The British Empire at its heyday will not be as big as the Spanish Empire is now. It includes the Dutch invasion, control, manipulation into the Netherlands. And so the Netherlands are becoming controlled by Spain just like everybody else in the whole world is. And they are struggling against this. They don't want this. This is a picture of the Spanish domination in 1576. And a little bit later, let's see, hold on. They revolt against Spain and push them back as far as the line here by the end of the 80 Years' War in 1648. So they're trying to push off this monster. They don't want him around, but the influence of Spain is very powerful. Now, theologically, this is the map, this is the kind of layout that's going on by that same period of time. All of the area that's in the brown or tan is all Catholic, dominated by Roman Catholicism. Then you've got the Reformed pockets, which are here, there, and the other places. Isn't it interesting that we've got Reformation theology in Transylvania, where Dracula was? Anyway, the Lutherans occupy to the north in this area here, and in the Netherlands is basically Reformed as well. They're Reformed. England, Great Britain is Reformed. They're following Reformed doctrine of either Calvin or Luther. And there's actually the biggest tug of war, the conflict that's going on in the Netherlands at this time is between Lutheranism and the Reformed thinking of John Calvin, John Knox, the like. And so we go back to our timeline. There's two entries here that we want to add to the timeline that should be at least a little bit familiar with you. The first is the writing of the Belgic Confession. This was done in 1561, and it was done by order of the church because they were pushing back against a doctrine that was not Reformed at all, and they were having trouble keeping that out as well. And then 2 years later, King Frederick III said that he wants to assert Reformed theology as opposed to Lutheranism in the Netherlands. And so he orders the writing of the Heidelberg Catechism. Now, you're probably more familiar with the Heidelberg. We recite the question number one here from time to time. What is your only hope in life and in death? And the Heidelberg Catechism is very distinct because it's in first person. That's the big attraction to it. I speak as though it comes from my own heart, and that's genius. I think that somebody else should have written that too, but anyway. But Those both come out in the early 1560s because there's that threat that's on the rise is coming from a man you also will recognize, Jacobus Arminius. He's in the Netherlands. And it will come to pass that dealing with his heresy, and they called it heresy, will be the product of the Synod of Dort. Any of that starting to ring a bell? Yeah, I kind of remember that, vaguely out there, those kind of things. Let's take a look just quickly at that whole scenario. Jacobus Arminius was born in 1560. He became a professor of theology at the University of Leiden. It's one of the premier seminaries in the Netherlands. And of course, it is steeped in the progressing Enlightenment movement. Jacobus Arminius is famous for his argumentation for free will, for his saying we are not totally depraved. We can make our own choice for God. Reason controls everything. And so he made it very clear of his thinking. And he actually died in 1609, but his followers got together in 1610 and they wrote what was called the Remonstrance because they were opposing Reformed theology. And he said, we have 5 points of remonstrance, of objection regarding Reformed theology, and we don't like Reformed theology for these 5 reasons. Bum, 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 bum. The church of the Dutch church called for a synod to answer Jacobus Arminius's objections, or the Arminians' objections. They met in 1618 to 19, and they hammered out 5 answers to the Arminians' remonstrance. And guess what those 5 answers are called today? The TULIP. T-U-L-I-P. And that formulates the essence of the Synod of Dort's response to Jacobus Arminius and his followers. And so Jacobus Arminius was considered a heretic. He was rejected. And as a result of that, it was a strong time for the Dutch Reformed Church, and they embraced all 3, the Synod of Dort, the Belgic Confession, the Canons of Dort, the answers, in other words, the Heidelberg, and that became their book of confessions. They called it the 3 Forms of Unity. Now, the 3 Forms of Unity are still a very valid and good set of confessional material. And in the various dialogues that go on between Presbyterians and in various things, there have been efforts to kind of unite our confessional past in this regard. We would love to be able to use the Heidelberg like we do the Shorter Catechism, but for one reason or another, we have seen fit to keep them apart. But they are identical in most ways with each other. And so the Netherlands are our Reformed brothers, and it's a very good thing to have. Now, still, the objections to this Reformed theology and all of its solidness was not settling well with the growing enlightening influence in the Dutch Reformed Church, and it resulted in a split. So the Dutch Reformed Church split. That's something that Protestants are very famous for doing, is splitting. And I wish I could say that was a mistake. It's not. It's necessary. The truth must be fought for. And so I have always been of that opinion when it comes to the arguments that go on about, should we stay and should we try to reform from within and should we change it? No, you are wasting your time. History says you are wasting your time. Leave. Leave while you have the strength and the conviction. And so the DRC split over that, with the predominance of it holding on to the three forms of unity. So now there is a growing contest intellectually, three-way tug of war between the powers that be. On one sense, you've got the Catholic Church, who are trying to maintain control where it is and hold on to its authority and its tradition. You've got the Reformation movement, sola scriptura, we're rejecting tradition. This is the only authority we need to hold on to. But then the Enlightenment. Man's reason is not cursed. He can think for himself, and he is doing just fine. And we need to rise above this old mythological stuff you called Christianity. We need to pull away from that. So there is a real intense battle going on three ways in the whole scenario. Now, I told you we went into depth about the French Revolution. And I'm focusing on that specifically because of its influence in the Netherlands. By this time, of course, France had also rejected the Spanish influence. The Spanish Empire was now dying at this point. But France is enraptured by the Enlightenment in all of the various ways. Man's ability to think and man's reason is all supreme. And the French Revolution was started by many of those Enlightenment challenges, to the point, you remember, that it was a nuclear war in France. Everybody was getting guillotined. You looked cross-eyed, you got guillotined. You messed somebody up, you got guillotined. You owed somebody money, you got guillotined. Everybody's heads was getting chopped off. We're talking tens of thousands. And it was a murderous and dreadful place to be. And because it was in the neighborhood, it scared the people in the Netherlands to death. They were afraid it was coming to them. They weren't exactly sure what was going on, but they were scared it was coming to them and that their heads were going to roll. And because the French Revolution was nothing but destructive, it left a vacuum of power. And as I told you before, that vacuum of power was filled by Napoleon, right? Napoleon Bonaparte took over. He was the new king of France, and he wanted to expand. He had that megalomaniac vision that guys like him have. He wanted to expand France's empire. Spain had its day, now it's France's turn. And so he was trying to push his influence into everywhere. And it went into the Netherlands and was a problem, as well as other places. But eventually, Napoleon was defeated, and he was exiled. He even came back once, but he was exiled again. And so everybody in the Netherlands was breathing a sigh of relief until Napoleon's brother came to power. Little brother wanted to do the same thing, but he got his stuffing beat in Germany, and he wasn't the problem and the threat that Napoleon had been. So in 1813, now we're up to that, Bonaparte's brother is defeated in Germany, but the rationalist, the Enlightenment theologians have got a grip on the Dutch Reformed Church. And as a result of that, there are all kinds of changes that are going on in the Dutch Reformed Church. You wouldn't even recognize the church anymore. It's really gone downhill. In 1816, they disregard the canons of Dort. Jacobus Arminius wasn't a problem anymore. He's just fine. There's no reason why we can't have those kinds of guys in our church too. And there are two reform movements that begin because of that. The first is called, and this is Dutch, so I can't pronounce it. It's called renewal. It's the effort from within to change. We're gonna reform this church from within. There's always the compassionate desire to do that. We're gonna reform. We're gonna bring it back. We're gonna bring it back. And they waste a lot of energy trying to change liberal minds that are determined to change your mind. And they also start a separate church. There's another split, and this time it's called the Separation. And so things are very wrecked in the Netherlands by this time. In 1834, the staunch reformers break from the DRC, and they form the Free Reformed Church. And in 1837, Kuyper is born. That's the world he's born into. We finally get to Kuyper. Yay! That's where he's born. That's a little fishing village, not too far from Rotterdam. His dad is a minister in the DRC. He's a go-along to get along kind of guy. He might say he's reformed, but he's not going to be offensively so. He's not going to talk about, what it really means. And he's got friends that are enlightened and doesn't want to rub feathers, and so he's really quite wishy-washy. His wife, Henriette, we don't know much about, but Kuyper is born to them, and in 1855, he goes to school at the University of Leiden. Remember Leiden? Remember? Bad place. Bad place. When he's there, he eats up, as any young seminarian's head full of mush does, all the modernist teaching he gets. He believes everything, hook, line, and sinker. Sinker? Yeah, sinker. And so as a result of that, he rejects all of the supernaturalism of the Bible. No virgin birth, no resurrection, none of this real stuff. He rejects the bodily resurrection of Christ. He displays an open contempt for Calvin. It's always easy to kick a dead person. And so he expresses an open contempt for John Calvin, and that's really what carries the day for him. He's engaged by this time. He's going through seminary, and he is engaged to a sweet young thing, and she is reformed. And so he is spending his time trying to enlighten his fiancée before he marries her. Can't you grow up and see that this has to change? You don't want to believe in all this foolishness anymore. You need to come around. And so they... She speaks from experience. But the man is brilliant. If you get anything from this story, this account of him, Abraham Kuyper is brilliant. He is unbelievably smart. And he thinks very fast. He graduates with highest honors. He's a proud disciple of the modernist movement. They are so happy with him. In 1863, that is a watershed year in his life, he marries Joanna Henrika Shea. This is the only picture I could find of her. This is an older picture, obviously. But that's his sweet young thing that he's been trying to bring around. He gets his doctorate in 1863 as well. And the theme of his doctorate is Providence is Superstition. He's unabashed in his conviction. And he's going to be a Saul for the Pharisees. That's what he is. He's a brilliant, excellent, well-educated man, outspoken, able to influence many. And he does after he does his doctorate, he does his first major work, his first major publication, comparing and contrasting two theologians. One he knows already very well, John Calvin. And he decides to pick on another author named Alasco. Now, the thing about Alasco is nobody's ever heard of him. It takes him a long time before he finally discovers some primary documents with which to work. But he writes this comparison between the two as his first major publication. And An impressive work, indeed. He will later reflect on this paper, on this book, this publication, and it will be after he's converted. And this is what he says. This is a very profound and foretelling comment on himself. He says, "It was Calvin himself who first disclosed to me those solid, unwavering lines that only need to be traced to inspire full confidence." Later he would discover just how grounded Calvin is and where he can go from there. I saw at once, later, that he had to advance exegetically. There is prophetic language about what he's going to be spending his life's work doing. Advancing exegetically. What does he mean by that? We're going to find out. Advancing exegetically, psychologically, and historically beyond Calvin. But nonetheless, here I found the foundations which, banning all doubt, permitted the edifice of faith to be constructed in a completely logical style, and with the surprising result that the most consistent ethic ruled in its inner chambers. So once he's converted, he is a Calvinist full bore, and he sees in him the strength and the foundation upon which to build an entire society. And that becomes his vision. But he's not there yet. He takes his first pastorate in a little bitty town called Beast, however you pronounce it. It's a DRC church, so it's mainline. That we would use that term today. It's mainline church. And he, of course, is preaching enlightenment, heresy from the pulpit. And he thinks he's doing a great job. And in the process of that first pastorate, he will experience his conversion. It started with that paper, with comparing Alasko to Calvin. The conclusion to that was his utter contempt for Calvin. But what he found out about Calvin will stick with him. He won't be able to shake it. And in the testimony of his conversion, that paper becomes the first step. The second thing is remember I said he's a brilliant man, and brilliant men, we have sometimes what? Sometimes peaks of emotional crisis. Kuyper had several over his lifetime emotional breakdowns. Just popped a fuse. Had to take some time off. And he did in his first pastorate. He popped that fuse and he had to take some time off. And in the process, somebody gave him a book. It might have been his wife. It's just a silly book of fiction, actually. It's called The Heir of Redcliffe. Now I have spoken to you young people before about how certain written publications have proved very influential to changing men's minds at key moments in history. And so I really encourage you, choose well and wisely what you read. It will have an influence on you. Remember I told you about how the book of Romans opened Martin Luther's mind, opened the gates of heaven to him. King James the first and sixth of England and Scotland, it was the turning point of the Reformation in Great Britain was in response to him saying, thinking men cannot be slaves. Think about that. Thinking men cannot be slaves. He also wrote the King's Book of Sports, which told people how to break the moral law of God and have a great time doing it. John Bunyan wrote, Pilgrim's Progress. His conversion story came from being given a book in prison before prison called The Plain Man's Pathway to Heaven. It changed his life. William Wilberforce, you remember studying him, The Rise and Progress of Religion in the Soul. Changed his life. It was very influential. And then comes Abraham Kuyper, and he reads a silly book of fiction called The Heir of Redcliffe. Now, I have tried to read this book. My wife is, I'm trying to bring her around too. I put this on my Kindle and I read several pages at night before I go to sleep, and I have for 2 months now. It is not my kind of reading. This book is driving me crazy. It's nothing but silly Downton Abbey kind of fiction. But the point is that when he reads the book with his mental fuse being popped, he begins to emotionally identify with some of the characters. One of the characters is named Philip. That's this flirt there leaning on the piano. He is indeed obnoxious. He is superior to all people. He's got a very issue with pride. There's another character in the book called Guy. Guy is very humble. He's very misunderstood. He's a genuine character. The book goes up and down in their adventures together. They can't stand each other. Guy contracts a fatal disease and dies. Spoiler alert, sorry. You don't want to read this, you really don't. Philip's world hits a wall. And that's what Kuyper identified with. I've hit a wall in my life. And he writes about it. He says, what I lived through in my soul at that moment, I fully understood only later, yet from that hour after that moment, I scorned what I formerly esteemed, and I sought what I once desired to escape. The man has changed. The Lord can use anything. And the man has been completely changed. He doesn't know it yet. He's still fishing for it. But he knows his life has changed. Now, he's still a minister in Beast. He's still preaching enlightenment stuff. He's still thinking he's doing a great job. But he's starting to notice that half his congregation doesn't show up to church on a regular basis. And so, being a nice country pastor that he is, he decides, I'm going to go visit these parishioners that won't come to church. And so he visits various people, and in order to try to figure out what's going on. And one of the people he visits is called Pieta Baltus. She's a 30-year-old farm girl. He comes to her door. She won't even shake his hand. She says, you have no right being a minister. You don't believe the gospel. Told him to his face. Straightened his act out right there. This is Pieta many years later. He kept that picture on his desk for the rest of his life. He described it as the palingenesis, which is, of course, the Latin there. Salvation is the work of the Holy Spirit. He didn't even believe in the Holy Spirit before. Through the washing of palingenesis, which is rebirth and renewal. Salvation is a supernatural event. Boy, has he come around. Of rebirth, and decidedly not something that humans can achieve. Praise God. He takes his second pastorate in 1867. I love this picture because I know what my wife is saying. Tell him to wash his hair. He takes his second pastorate in a larger, remember the small Beast was just a small place. He takes a second pastorate in a larger city now, in Domkerk in Utrecht, and the modernists have control of the city. It has gotten so obnoxious now that they do their baptisms in the name of faith, hope, and love. Do I have to explain that to you? Okay. And he grows to become not the champion of Enlightenment theology, but its harshest critic. And he goes after him from the pulpit. And he not only, of course, creates enormous waves, but he draws great crowds. It grows big. His attention, his fame grows bigger and bigger and bigger, and he attacks the modernist theology that he was trained in. A couple of years ago, I talked to you about John Witherspoon, and I told you about his remarkable use of satire to criticize his opponents. Anybody remember that? Of course you all do. Of course. Well, a bit of satire on Kuyper's part was his modernist creed. He says, I, a modernist, believe in a God who is Father of all mankind, and in Jesus, not the Christ, but the Rabbi from Nazareth. I believe in a humanity which is by nature good, but needs to strive after improvement. I believe that sin is only relative, and hence that forgiveness is merely something of human invention. I believe in the hope of a better life, and without judgment, the salvation of every soul. Ta-da! You know, he's ridiculing them with this bitter kind of language. It's this period of time he meets an older theologian and writer named Groen van Prinsterer. As I was talking to Phil before that we started, that's a whole story in itself. I can't go into that, but to say the least, van Prinsterer was the one who put the influence in Kuyper that would give him the engine to go forward with clarity in his mind. And so that relationship was very profound and very important. In 1870, he takes his third pastorate. This is in Amsterdam. This is the big time. He's made it. He has one of the largest churches in the largest city in all of the Netherlands. He's the pastor of the most prestigious church. It boasts 140,000 members, 136 office bearers, 28 ministers, 10 sanctuaries, and 4 chapels. So it's not just one place. And he's on top of it all. And he's doing a marvelous, influential work, and they're coming to him in droves. His Calvinism is catching fire in a way that it had died all but completely just before. 2 years later, he begins writing for the local paper. And he puts out regular articles in the paper because he wants everybody to read what he has to say. And he's beginning to understand how his influence can radiate out beyond just the church. His vision now is to take Calvinism into the world. And he's still trying to figure out how that's going to happen. He writes for the paper called The Standard, and he's formulating his opinions on something he calls anti-revolutionary views. That's a curious thing. You know, even Christians sometimes think we need revolution around here, overthrow. But remember, they just watched France blow up and die. And Kuyper is saying Calvinism will take us forward, not backward, but forward in a calm, proper style that will not call for people's heads, literally. And he's saying if we're going to reform all of culture, we can do it calmly and with a conviction that comes from Christ. And so he actually begins to call his viewpoint anti-evolutionary. He doesn't want fights. He doesn't want arguments. He doesn't want conflicts. And that begins to attract attention. And it begins to get more and more oomph behind it. There's the picture of the Standard, the paper that he wrote for. This is what he said about this in that time. He said, "You cannot walk away from your own time. You might want to go backwards. You might want to go back to the good old days. You might want to go back to, when we really, stepped on Arminius and told him where to go. We would like to go back to the days when we were more comfortable and everything else and didn't have anywhere near the threats and the differences of opinion." He says, "But you are in your time providentially, and you have to do something with it. You cannot walk away from your own time, but you must take it as it is, warts and all. And the times demand that we either accept the unsettling of our faith or enter the fray." By that he doesn't mean the battle, he means the dialogue. You don't run away from it. Christians can have varying ways and approaches to culture. One way is to retreat from culture and say, we're going to do our thing, you're the world, you do yours. The other is to try to conquer culture. Kuyper's way is to contribute to culture, to build in a Christian point of view in everything, in every aspect of life. Let's put the gospel forward. That's his main task. Given this choice, the committed person, he says, does not hesitate. And so he is wanting to move forward. In 1874, he takes a radical decision. He says, "I have made a success of being a pastor in the church. The church is behind me. I need to go beyond the church into the world." And he's going to lead his movement into the world. So he does something very controversial. To this day, it is controversial. You have some who say, well, Kuyper was okay, but he left the pastorate. He walked away from the church. And they don't like that. And others say, go, Kuyper, go, that kind of thing. In 1874, he resigned from the pastorate. He renounced his call to divinity so that he could run for Parliament. He could not run for Parliament if he was an active pastor. He wanted to run for Parliament and he wanted to change the government. He wanted to go after the government. And so he presses his influence in politics, and one of the first and foremost things he wants to work on that will stay with him for the rest of his political life is Christian education. His views on Christian education are very intriguing and very interesting. We'll get into that maybe next week, Lord willing. But the point is that he sees the point, the vitality, the need for countering secular education already. Now we're in the 19th century, remember. Countering secular education because of its polluting influences with a Christian alternative. He's not saying we need to get rid of that, but we need to have our own, and we need to provide our own educational resources, and we need to do it with as much conviction and as much emphasis as possible. So Christian education becomes one of his primary things. In 1879, he formally begins the Anti-Revolutionary Party. Not out to throw anybody out on their ear, not out to revolt, not out to have a war. We want a party that will run for office and have officers and will make their influence known in Parliament. And in doing that, the Anti-Revolutionary Party, by definition, will oppose what is called popular sovereignty. Now, today, we would call that mere democracy, majority rule. The United States is not a democracy. One particular party will say that over and over and over and over and over again. Oh, we are Democrat, we are democracy, we are democracy, we're democracy. No, we're not. We are not a democracy. Popular sovereignty is democracy. It's whatever the crowd wants. Whatever the most people want, that's what they get. And he's opposing that in this party. Because if the people aren't sovereign, who is? God is sovereign. This is a Christian political party. The Lord is sovereign. The Lord is whom we serve. And we're not abashed about that. We're not ashamed about that. So he wants to infuse a Christian worldview into all segments of society. You've got your particular worldview. Guess what? I've got mine, and you're going to hear from me. He's not renouncing it. He's not condemning it. He's not trying to push it aside. He's saying, you need to hear mine also, because I've got one that's better than yours. He becomes a member of Parliament, and he participates actively in their Parliament is like Congress, becomes a congressman, and he serves there for many years. The very next year, in 1880, he starts his own university, the Free University of Amsterdam. Free means not controlled or funded by the state. That's a big deal. All education so far has been funded by the state. So he starts the University of Amsterdam, and it's not funded by the state. It's funded by the people. And at his opening speech to get the university started, he gives out what has become his most famous quotation, becomes his battle cry, and that's what's been in your bulletins for a while. He says, "Oh, no single piece of our mental world is to be hermeneutically sealed off from the rest, and there is not a square inch in the whole domain of our human existence over which Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not cry, 'Mine.'" That's conviction. God is sovereign over every part of life, and we're going to demonstrate it. We're going to show you how that's the case. You've got your way of doing things, you're going to hear from us too. He's not trying to get rid of anything. It's almost like, well, yeah, so he wants to do that. So, but this is, by 1880, guess what? The Enlightenment is back. The frustrations and the question mark, and it's not. The liberals don't want this. And so during that first decade of the University of Amsterdam's existence, the DRC, which is now saturated with Enlightenment, starts to kind of isolate the University of Amsterdam. We aren't going to ordain any of your graduates. Remember that. You're going to hear about that in other circumstances as well. That's called manipulation. We don't care about your graduating from university, that we don't like that school, so we're not going to recognize your graduation. We can't ordain you because you have not been properly trained. And also the DRC decides, well, we don't need the three forms of unity anymore either. We can do without that. We want to be inclusive. We want to be all embracing many more viewpoints. Kuyper has enough of that. He starts a branch called the Grieving Ones, the Doliante. And later, it will break off into another church. Yes, another church. The Dolorenda Kirk, the Grieving Ones Church, is formed, and they will move forward with Kuyperian Calvinistic theology. One of the most famous moments in his life that crosses our paths is in 1899. That's just 20 years later. He is invited to speak at Princeton University. They have annual lectures there, kind of like we do here, called the Stone Lectures for the original professor they were named after. And he is invited to speak, and he says, "I'm going to speak on Calvinism." Okay, you would expect, all right, I know what he's going to say. He's going to talk about the tulip. Go through the whole 5 points of Calvinism. He says, no, I'm going to assume you know that. I'm going to tell you something maybe you've never thought of before. He says, I'm going to talk about how Calvinism is a life system. It permeates everything. how Calvinism and history relate and develop, how Calvinism and religion are associated, Calvinism and politics, Calvinism and science, Calvinism and art, Calvinism and the future. He's really painting a picture for how this worldview is setting the stage for everything he wants to accomplish. One author puts it this way, he says, "The only decisive and lawful and consistent defense for Protestant nations against the encroaching and overwhelming modernism comes in the purest form by the lectures that he gives at Princeton. He sought to present Calvinism as an all-embracing life system or worldview, stressing the relationship between God, humankind, and the world. He wished to dispel the notion that Calvinism was merely a doctrinal system or ecclesiastical structure. Instead, he sought to show how it was a comprehensive Christian philosophy." Sometimes we regard philosophy, we hear that word and we go, I don't want to go there. But a philosophy is simply a worldview, a way of approaching the world. And if your worldview is Christian, then it goes beyond just what the Bible says. It goes into how you look at the world and relate to the world and affect your world. And that is philosophical. That is a game plan. That is what Kuyper is wanting to put forward. Rooted as it was from Calvin's theology in the notions of creation, fall, and redemption, comprehensively conceived. His vision is broad. In 1901, he was elected prime minister. The man is incredible. Now he's the prime minister of his country. And for 4 years, he runs, his influence is powerful. But by 1905, he is booted out of that role. So he only has it for 4 years, but it is effective. It is tremendously effective. He remains in Parliament for many more years after. But while he was prime minister, he kept pressing for Christian education and for the need for Parliament to fund it, just like it funds secular education. Isn't that radical? You need to pay for Christian education just like you pay for public education. And he made a lot of inroads into that. He kept serving in Parliament until he actually died in 1920. Was a very simple funeral. He didn't want flowers, but thousands attended his funeral. And as the record goes, there was thunderous singing of Psalm 89, which was one of his favorites. "A God greatly to be feared in the council of the holy ones, and awesome above all who are around him. O Lord God of hosts, who is mighty as you are, O Lord, with your faithfulness all around you." Just to give you an idea of the writings that Kuyper has come out with, this is not a full extent, of course, but some of the more well-known ones. The work of the Holy Spirit is all about his conversion and the effectiveness, the real work of the real supernatural Spirit and its influence in painting his vision. His writings on various other subjects. He wrote on the problem of poverty, which was possibly controversial. I'll touch on that a bit next week. His biggest work by far is called the Encyclopedia of Sacred Theology. And of course, then there's that Lectures on Calvinism. You can still get Lectures on Calvinism very easily, and I encourage you to read it. It's pretty amazing. I find Kuyper a bit wordy, but it's good stuff. It's really good stuff. So if you're patient and you can get through it, that would be great. Okay, any questions? Yeah, Phil.
So the other great Dutch theologian of that time who, what was his relationship like with Herman Bavinck?
Bavinck came along just a little bit. He was kind of a junior. And again, that's a big story. But Bavinck's influence was built on Kuyper's, and the two were kind of a 1-2 punch. Bavinck was also a theological professor and made his own impact in that. Do you have something you want to say about that?
Well, no, I was just, because I know Bavinck also served in Parliament as
Yes.
well.
Yeah. Yeah. When I went into seminary, I was green as anything. And the first book they hand me is Doctrine of God by Bavinck, and it brought me to tears. I couldn't read it.
The newer translations are a lot.
Oh yeah, I know, but it was way over my head, and I thought, I'm never going to make this. I'm never going to get this. I'm never going to get this. Anyway, don't bother with the heir of Radcliffe.
Everybody's going to go out and read it now.
I'm just being honest with you. Ring.